There is a silence in human history that most people never truly understand. A silence that carries more power than every empire ever built, more authority than every king who ever ruled, and more truth than every philosophy written by human hands. And in that silence, a voice once spoke, not loud, not aggressive, not chasing power, but calm enough to be ignored, and yet deep enough to reshape civilization for thousands of years. Because what Jesus revealed was never just religion. It was a mirror to human nature, a mirror most people still avoid looking into. And the strange part is this: the more modern the world becomes, the more his words feel like they were spoken for right now, not 2,000 years ago, as if time itself failed to dilute the weight of his truth. But to understand those truths, you don't need belief. You only need attention. Because these are not just spiritual ideas, they are psychological laws hidden inside ancient language. And once you see them clearly, you don't go back to the same way of thinking again. The first lesson begins where almost every human struggle begins, with identity. He taught that a person is not defined by what they own, what they show, or what others say about them. In a world obsessed with image, this idea quietly destroys the foundation of ego. Because if you are not your possessions, then who are you really when everything is stripped away? Most people never answer that question honestly. They avoid it through noise, success, distraction, and validation. But Jesus forced people to face it, and that's where the discomfort begins. Because truth often removes comfort before it gives clarity. The second lesson is even more unsettling. He suggested that what comes out of a person matters more than what goes into them. Not in a physical sense, but in a psychological one. Words, actions, intentions. These reveal the inner state of a human being far more than appearances ever will. And if that is true, then no one can hide for long. Not from others, and not from themselves. This is where self-deception begins to collapse. Because a person can fake confidence, fake success, even fake kindness for a while. But they cannot fake the direction of their inner world forever. The third lesson takes everything deeper. He taught forgiveness not as weakness, but as liberation. And this is where most people misunderstand him completely. Forgiveness was never about approving what hurt you. It was about refusing to let it continue living inside you. Because what you refuse to release does not stay in the past. It continues to live in your present. And suddenly, forgiveness becomes less about morality and more about mental freedom. The fourth lesson is something most people resist even hearing. He said that loving your enemies is not about them, it is about you. Because hatred is not just an emotion. It is a chain that connects your mind to the very thing you despise. And as long as that chain exists, you are never fully free. So when he spoke about love, he wasn't speaking about softness. He was speaking about psychological independence. The fifth lesson quietly dismantles pride. He repeatedly pointed toward humility, not as self-degradation, but as clarity. The ability to see yourself accurately without exaggeration or denial. Because pride inflates reality, and insecurity shrinks it. But truth stands somewhere in between, and only truth allows growth. The sixth lesson reveals something most people miss entirely. He valued the unseen more than the seen. Intention over performance, character over reputation, inner alignment over external approval. And in a world driven by perception, this becomes one of the hardest truths to live by. Because it means you can be applauded publicly and still be empty privately. The seventh lesson shifts everything again. He spoke about faith not as blind belief, but as inner stability. A form of trust that holds you steady when logic cannot provide certainty. And psychologically, this is the difference between collapsing under uncertainty and moving through it. The eighth lesson is about judgment. He warned against judging others harshly because the standard you use will eventually be used against you, not as punishment, but as reflection. When you judge constantly, your mind becomes trained to see only flaws. And eventually, that same lens turns inward. The 9th lesson introduces a difficult truth about suffering. He did not glorify pain, but he transformed its meaning. He suggested that suffering can refine awareness rather than destroy it. And while this idea is uncomfortable, it explains something very real: why some people break under pressure, while others become deeply wise through it. The 10th lesson is about presence. He repeatedly pointed people back to the present moment, not as a spiritual trend, but as a way to stop mentally living in regret or anxiety, because a mind trapped in the past is already half lost, and a mind trapped in the future is already half scattered. The 11th lesson speaks to desire. He warned that chasing everything often results in losing what actually matters, because desire without direction becomes endless hunger, and endless hunger never feels like fulfillment. The 12th lesson is about truth itself. He suggested that truth is not always comfortable, but it is always freeing. And this is why many people avoid it without realizing they are trading freedom for comfort. The 13th lesson focuses on service. He showed that meaning is often found not in being served, but in serving something beyond yourself. And psychologically, this shifts identity from isolation to connection. The 14th lesson is about resilience. He spoke as if storms are not exceptions in life, but expectations. And the measure of a person is not whether storms come, but what remains when they pass. And finally, the 15th lesson ties everything together. Transformation does not come from external change alone. It begins when perception itself changes. Because when the mind changes, the world does not look the same anymore. And that is the hidden pattern behind all of these teachings. Not control, not dominance, not escape, but awareness. And once awareness deepens, everything else in life quietly begins to reorganize itself around it. And when you think the message is already complete, there is still another layer beneath it. Because these teachings were never meant to be understood all at once. They unfold slowly, like light entering a room one corner at a time. The 16th lesson is about fear. He consistently pointed toward a life not governed by it. Not because fear does not exist, but because fear distorts perception. It makes small problems feel permanent and temporary storms feel like identity. And when fear leads, clarity disappears long before danger ever arrives. The 17th lesson is about truth under pressure. He showed that what you truly are is not revealed in comfort, but in moments of stress, loss, and uncertainty. Because comfort allows performance, but pressure reveals reality. And most people only discover themselves when life stops cooperating. The 18th lesson speaks to inner conflict. He implied that a divided mind cannot sustain peace. When one part of you wants discipline and another part wants escape, life becomes a constant negotiation with yourself. And that internal war is often more exhausting than any external struggle. The 19th lesson is about spiritual blindness in everyday life. He suggested that people can look directly at truth and still not see it, not because it is hidden, but because their expectations filter it out. And sometimes the biggest barrier to understanding is not ignorance, but assumption. The 20th lesson reveals something deeply human. He showed that transformation is not forced, it is allowed. The more a person tries to control every outcome, the more they resist the very change they claim to want. And surrender, in this sense, is not giving up. It is letting reality become clearer than resistance. The 21st lesson is about integrity. He emphasized that consistency between inner belief and outer action is what creates a stable life. Without that alignment, even success feels hollow, because the mind constantly knows when it is acting against itself. The 22nd lesson focuses on attachment. He warned that holding too tightly to anything, status, people, outcomes, creates suffering not because those things are bad, but because nothing in life is designed to be permanently controlled. And the tighter the grip, the more painful the eventual loss becomes. The 23rd lesson is about spiritual awareness in ordinary moments. He never confined meaning to sacred spaces or special occasions. Instead, he pointed toward the idea that awareness itself can turn the simplest moment into something profound if the mind is fully present inside it. The 24th lesson speaks to the hidden cost of ego. He showed that ego does not just create arrogance, it creates separation. And separation makes everything feel like competition, even love, even success, even relationships. In that state, life is no longer experienced, only compared. The 25th lesson is about patience with growth. He implied that inner transformation cannot be rushed. Just like a seed does not argue with the soil about timing, human growth follows a rhythm that cannot be forced without breaking its natural development. The 26th lesson is about perception of others. He consistently moved attention away from condemnation and toward understanding. Not to excuse behavior, but to recognize that people act from internal conditions most others never see. And understanding this removes unnecessary emotional distortion. The 27th lesson brings everything into a final psychological shift. He pointed toward a life where love is not a reaction, but a state of being. Not something you switch on and off depending on behavior, but something that becomes your baseline way of perceiving the world. And when that shift happens, the world itself does not necessarily change, but the person looking at it does. The final layer of these teachings feels less like information and more like awakening, as if everything before this was preparing the mind to finally see something it was always missing. The 28th lesson is about letting go of control. He pointed toward a way of living where you do your part fully, but you stop trying to force outcomes that were never fully in your hands. Because the illusion of total control creates constant anxiety, while acceptance creates quiet strength. And in that space, not because life becomes easier, but because the mind stops making it harder than it needs to be. The 30th lesson is about spiritual responsibility. He emphasized that awareness is not just something to feel, but something to live. If you understand more, you are also expected to act differently. Because insight without action slowly turns into self-deception, and knowledge without change becomes just noise in the mind. The 31st lesson is about peace under all conditions. He showed that real peace is not dependent on circumstances. It is not something you earn when life is good and lose when life is difficult. Instead, it is a deeper stability that remains even when everything around you is uncertain. And discovering that kind of peace changes how you respond to everything. And the final lesson, the 32nd lesson, brings everything to one quiet point. He pointed toward a life where love replaces fear, awareness replaces confusion, and presence replaces constant mental escape. Not as a theory, but as a lived state of being. Because the ultimate transformation is not becoming someone new, but finally becoming fully present as who you already are beneath all the noise. And if these lessons made you pause even for a moment, then don't just let them stay here. Like the video, share it with someone who needs clarity in their life right now, and subscribe to the Wisdom Code for more deep wisdom that most people never hear but deeply need. Because sometimes, one simple reminder is enough to change the direction of an entire life.